Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Joining me today is Pat McClellan to talk about his app that helps nonprofits and messaging. Pat, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Alex. Glad to be here.
So, before we get started in the actual app, I'm curious to know your superhero origin story. That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits?
Well, let me start with how I got started with Salesforce. I think I've got a fairly common trailblazer story. I was a career changer. I spent 33 years in media production and putting on marketing events, events management. So in my mid-50s, I had gotten to a point where I was an executive and I didn't really get to make things like I had earlier in my career. So I decided it was time for a change, and I transitioned by leaving my role at a marketing agency and signing up for a Trailhead account. And I started learning Trailhead. I completed my first badge on May 31st, 2017. So it's been almost 6 years for me getting started in Salesforce. And then I followed the path that I see so many career transitioners do, is we dive headfirst into Trailhead and into certifications. And I basically was doing Trailhead full time for about 5 months. And during those 5 months, I earned my admin, platform app builders, and platform developer 1 certifications. And I thought, okay, now I'm all set. I've got my certs. I'm ready to go. I had recruiters contacting me. They said, send us your resume, we'll get you some work as a developer. And I sent my resume, and I should have realized I was experienced enough. I should have known. I had one recruiter say, look, I can get you a job as a chief marketing officer, but not as a developer. You've never done any development for anybody. And so I found myself in exactly the same catch-22 that so many others do, which is I don't have any experience and therefore I can't get hired. And I'll never get any experience because I can't get hired, right? So I decided that I needed to make my own experience. And luckily I had enough of financial savings that I could spend the time. I decided I needed to build an app that would demonstrate that I could build apps. And that meant really, for credibility, I needed to be able to get it on App Exchange. I wanted to build an app that was easy to explain and hard to build to prove that I could. And therefore, I kind of settled in on an app, Proton Text, that does texting from Salesforce. Again, 3 words, I can explain what it does: texting from Salesforce. And anybody that knows about writing integrations knows that's kind of a complicated thing to set up and do. So that's what I built.
Yeah, your story is actually awesome. It's not obviously the first time that I heard about it. And I thought it was an amazing accomplishment to say, I'm going to prove to the world that I'm able to be a competent developer. So I'm just going to build an app. And that's not usually the way that people do things. And I love the not necessarily a shortcut, but the entrepreneurial, let's call it, approach that you've taken, because I'm sure now your knowledge in development in Salesforce is phenomenal, and it's the app is a testament of that fact.
Well, it's funny. Once you've got an app on App Exchange, nobody questions whether or not you've got experience or whether you can do something. So I think everybody knows that going through the security protocols to get on App Exchange are pretty rigorous. So. And honestly, looking back to 5 years ago when I was building this app, if I could give myself advice, I'd say, hey, dummy, don't try to build something so ambitious. Let's go with something that, you can invest a few months on, get it on App Exchange, and then go on and build your next app. But I was innocent back then. So
let's talk about it. What made you decide to build this particular app, this messaging app?
Sure. Well, I mean, as I was learning learning Salesforce in Trailhead, I saw in the UI, and I, by the way, I was learning this at a time when everything was being promoted around Lightning, and nobody was really talking about Classic, although still at that time, probably 60 to 70% of customers were still on Classic. But in Lightning, I really liked the approach to it. I liked the way that the workflow was integrated to wherever you are. And you could have multiple things on a page and all of that. And you could have, your email activity, and you could have your telephone logging and all of that. And I thought, where is the texting? where is the texting? And so I looked at the texting apps that were available, and they were all, even though some of them had applied the Lightning styling to them, essentially they were running in Classic. You had to go to their app in the app selector in order to use them. They weren't integrated into the workflow. And I thought, here's a real missing opportunity. What I really would like to have as a user would be to have the messaging app that's on my phone, except up on my screen. And I want it on my screen in every page that I'm on, whether it's a home page or a record page or a utility bar or wherever. I want to be able to text from wherever I am to whoever is relevant about whatever I'm looking at. And then when I come back to that page, I want to be able to see those conversations. And so that kind of integration into Lightning, again, there were competitors who were doing texting, but nobody that had it really integrated into the workflow and connected to the records that you care about. So that was the need that I saw. So that's what I built. And in fact, the fact that everybody knows how to text and knows, can imagine how they are using texting in their work. In fact, many people are already using texting in their work. They're just doing it from their phone instead of from Salesforce. And therefore, there's no record of it, no organizational memory of it. The fact that everybody can do it in every industry was a challenge for me, because when you put your app on App Exchange, the first thing they do is they give you all this marketing support. They say, all right, here's how you can really promote yourselves. Step one, narrow your audience, figure out which industry you're going to focus on, or figure out which users you're going to focus on. Are you for salespeople? Are you for service people? Or, where are you going to fit? What's your niche? And that was tough for me, because literally everybody in every industry, at every level of the organization, might need to use text. So I kind of went out there undifferentiated. And I'd have to say that nonprofits we found each other. I really didn't know where I was going to find my hold in the market, and nonprofits kind of found me. We fit each other's needs.
Can you talk a bit more about that, in the sense of what was that magic moment where you realized that based on the features and the functionality and the look and feel of the app, it was best suited for nonprofits versus a for-profit company?
Yeah, well, back then, looking forward, I don't know that I had this perspective, but looking back, I can sort of see this. First of all, I'll say that for the first 2 years that I had this app, I was also nonprofit unintentionally. So, but the reality is, my very first client for Proton Text was a small nonprofit veterans organization. And since then, I've maintained a balance of about 75% nonprofit customers. I've got customers that are, I've got several colleges, small colleges. I have a synagogue that runs a school, lots of veteran services organizations, from job training and placement to housing, access to healthcare and suicide prevention. I've got some human services organizations like elder care and crisis intervention, healthcare job training as part of a union. And I've got one customer that coordinates volunteers to bake and deliver birthday cakes for kids who would be forgotten otherwise. I mean, sometimes it's the simple things. Yeah, everything from human trafficking and suicide prevention to birthday cakes. And they're all valid. They all touch people in really important ways. And I mentioned we kind of fit each other's needs. The app that I've got, Proton Text, covers all three major use cases of texting in Salesforce. So, for example, the one-to-one messenger is really well suited for direct conversations with clients. And by clients, I mean whoever you're serving. When I built this, I was thinking, this is sales reps talking to their customers. But the reality is that particularly in nonprofits, they're serving clientele that probably doesn't have an office phone number and probably doesn't check their email, right? Some of them may be out on the street and may have no other means of contact. And then automated texting, using flows and the invocable actions that are part of the app, that works really well for appointment reminders and case status updates and coordinating volunteers and confirming donations or reminding people that their membership and their donation is due or whatever. And then the third use case is the Proton Blaster, and that's ideal for reaching large groups of donors, volunteers, event attendees. So the app really serves a broad range of communications needs for the broad range of customers that I have. And then the other thing I think that fits specific to me and my company, many nonprofits have small staffs and accidental admins. So they need a level of support that they just won't get from many large companies. A lot of large companies look at them and see, small revenue dollars and think, we're not going to spend a lot of time helping them out. And that fits me very well. I like that. I like to teach. I like to support. My needs, we fit each other. My needs fit the nonprofits. I'm a one-person company. I don't have to worry about generating revenues for investors or keeping a staff employed. So I can kind of do what I want. And what I want is I feel the need to build something that is serving the mission of my customers and doing something good in the world. I read through that list of my customers, and I can't tell you how proud that makes me.
I want to jump into some of those features you mentioned, but before we get there, one thing that really struck with me is that the fact that you're really close to your customers. It's almost like not a personal relationship, but at least you get to the point where you're heavily invested in their success, and you elicit their feedback as often as you can, and you support them as much as you can. And I found that kind of personalization is rare to find in a larger organization or larger vendor versus, like you mentioned, because you're a one-man army, you can offer that kind of relationship. So I'm really, that's really something to be proud of.
Oh, well, I am proud of it, but I also benefit from it. The lessons that I've learned from my customers are invaluable. All of the best features of my product, and I'm constantly innovating this product. If you look on protontext.com, there's a tab on there that shows the release notes. And you'll see that I am releasing a new version or a fix or a patch or new features, probably 10 times a year. I'm always listening to my customers, and they give me great ideas for features that wouldn't be just useful for them, but will make the product better. Things like things that I've added in the last year are scheduled one-to-one texts, sending images and files from an automated text, like so an MMS, outgoing MMS in an automated text, an out-of-office feature, so that if you're away from your desk or away on vacation, you can either send a message, an auto response message when somebody texts you, or forward it to a queue so that somebody else can handle that. Group texts, real-time error reporting on both one-to-one messaging and for bulk SMS blasts. All of those ideas came from my customers. And in fact, as I look through this list, all but one of them were from nonprofit customers. So they're really using the product and maintaining a conversation with me and saying, hey, how do I do this with it? And I'm like, well, I don't think you can. So let me fix that. I think when you invest time in supporting your customers, they pay you back by sending you other customers. That's how I get almost all of my business is word of mouth.
We can't obviously show our audience members the look and feel of the app, but I remember very clearly and one thing you mentioned when you demoed it to me was that your approach was you wanted to make it look as integrated into Salesforce Lightning as possible. Can you speak more about that?
Sure. That was based on two key ideas. Number one is I'm not a designer. I'm not particularly artistic. I don't have a bad eye, but I never studied design. And therefore, it made sense to me to rely on somebody else's design. Why not steal it, especially when Salesforce encourages you to do that? And so the design I stole was SLDS. I made this look as much like Salesforce as possible. Now, part of that was again, that I'm not a designer, so I had to use the tools that are available to me. The second thing is I think it would look, I didn't want it sticking out like a sore thumb on the page. And I really, right before I submitted this app initially for security review, literally the day before I was planning to submit it, I happened upon an announcement that Twilio, which is my backend service provider, so Proton Text is an integration of Twilio, really. Twilio was coming out with their own product for Salesforce, Twilio for Salesforce. And I thought, oh man, I am so screwed. They, because they've got a huge engineering staff, and how much better is their app going to be? And I went through a really dark 24 hours of thinking that I'd wasted the last 6 months of my life. And then I decided, you know what? I realized that their intent is to create some hooks into Salesforce so that they can attract you to their development platform, their flows, their studio, all of their stuff, which is fine. But I think most of my customers really want to stay in Salesforce. And so I invested a few more weeks really making my app look and feel like the app that Salesforce would have built for themselves if they built a texting app. I wanted it to be so Salesforce that nobody could top it. And part of that was integrating it so that it's smart. It knows what page it's on. And therefore, it knows who you're likely to want to text. And it knows which conversations you're going to want to see. So I use a lot of the functions that are built into Lightning, the record ID and the knowing which object you're on, and pulling the schema to see what's available. I use all of that to make the app so intuitive, just to feel like it's really built in. So it was really, I think the look and feel of it are really just a result of my desperation to make it more Salesforce than anybody else could be, and to adapt for the fact that I'm not a designer by trade.
You mentioned a couple of features, the one-on-one texting, the automated ones for reminders, and then Blaster. And then obviously I put the words Proton, Text, and Blaster together, Proton Blaster. So there seems to be a kind of a Star Trek, Star Wars theme here. What's going on with that?
Well, when I started, when I left my job at the agency and I started studying, I was doing some consulting on the side. And so I needed a name for an LLC. So I set up my LLC, and picking a name for the consulting agency was, I went through, you want to pick something. I'm just kind of sciencey. It's not so much science fiction. I'm just sciencey. And I wanted a science term in there. So I settled on Proton. And then I wanted sort of a number and a vibe. And so, I don't know, I just hit on Proton 7 group. People ask me why Proton 7, and I jokingly tell them because Proton 1 through 6 the domains were already taken. So, so anyway, Proton 7 group was my consulting company before I even started building the app. And I started building the app, and it was 2 or 3 months before I figured out I needed a name for it. So I just sort of defaulted to calling it Proton Text. And first version of it did that one-to-one texting and some automated texting. It didn't do blasting. And during that year, some of my early customers said, we really do need to do blasting, and we don't want to have to install one of these other apps. Can't you please add that to the app? And I was a little resistant because that's really where my competitors lived. That's where they were making their big money on that bulk texting. But I woke up one morning and I thought, well, if I built it, what would I call it? And I started laughing out loud when I realized I would get to build a Proton Blaster. After that, I've joked to my wife that someday I'll write my autobiography, how I built a Proton Blaster in my attic, because that's where my office was. So that's the blaster, and that's the naming. I'm just kind of a science geek.
I love it. Love it. One of the things that I really enjoyed about our past conversations as well as a fellow app developer, we kind of have a lot of ideas we can ping pong, more me learning from you than you learning from me. And I know this next segment might be more for the Salesforce consultants than the executive directors of nonprofits, but I'd love to talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of what it's like to build an app, have it put on the Salesforce App Exchange, go through that whole process, just to give people either an idea of what are the actual steps to go through, or other considerations to keep in mind in case somebody wants to build their own app. So I would like to jump into the whole development of it, because building an app, and this is to give some context for people who are unaware, when you're building an app in Salesforce, you have basically two main types of apps you can build: a managed app or an unmanaged app. And the differences are, a managed app is something you install in your own Salesforce instance, but you don't really have much permission in terms of control or changes to that app. versus the unmanaged, you can install it and it's kind of like you built it yourself. It's more of like an accelerator. It just gets you going and then you can customize it as much as you want from that point onward. And there are different rules and responsibilities and ways of building it, knowing which one you're going to build, which type you're going to build. So I'd love to know a bit about, high level, what it's like to build a managed package that you're intending to put on the App Exchange.
Sure. Well, I mean, the managed package, as you say, is more controlled. It's more closed. So, for example, nobody can install my app and then open up the classes and see how I wrote the code, right? So you can't steal the code. So you've got some protection that way. The downside of that is that once you've got a managed package, I've gone through, dozens of versions of this app, and you can never, ever take out functionality. So this is Salesforce's policy because they're protecting against a new version breaking or taking away a capability that someone has been using, right? So it makes sense, but you're stuck with some legacy, right? You're stuck with some components that you really can't, you can rename them and call them deprecated, but you can't take them out of the package. You can't break something for anybody that has previously installed it. So that aside, then the question becomes, how do you make a managed package flexible? How do you make it so that people can figure out ways to use it in their own environment? So in that sense, you build in features for every feature, for every component. You have to decide, is this something that I am going to turn off or on? Is this something that I'll give the admin the capability to turn it on or off or license this particular user or put it on a particular page? Or is this a feature that the user can turn on and off? And so all of those decisions are weighed out in terms of what percentage of the people do I think this will benefit? And for those that aren't necessarily going to use it, is it going to get in their way? Right. So I think a lot about the user experience. Of course, there's the technical figuring out the technology behind how to make that work. But really, that's kind of secondary. You can kind of figure out how to do it no matter what. It's just a matter of, does everybody get this, or do only the people that admins get it, or only the people that want it get it, right? Out of office, for example. Out of office is a new feature, and it's something that I just added. And basically, when the admin drops it on the page, it installs it on a particular page using Lightning App Builder or Page Builder, they have just a checkbox to allow or not allow out of office. So that's one that, if the admin says it's there, then all the users see it. And if the admin says nope, then it's not there. So there's always this continuum. And the reason that you have to figure out where a feature is on that continuum is that every new feature involves an additional level of complexity for users or for admins. You have to explain what it is. They have to understand how to use it. If there's a switch, they have to know what the switch does. Additionally, you have to think about the UI. Every new feature, how is this going to be integrated in an intuitive way so that you don't see a bunch of buttons that you can't figure out what that icon is, right? So you need to build in all of these considerations go into every feature in there. So it's an important and kind of a fun design dance that you go through in designing a product. If you're starting from scratch, you build that, what they refer to as the MVP, the minimally viable product. My minimally viable product did one-to-one texting. It would send a text, it would receive a text. There was no schedule, there was no anything. That's all it did. Once I got that working, then I looked back at my app on my phone, on my messaging app, and said, oh, timestamps. Okay, I need to put a timestamp on every one of them. Okay, so that's the next feature I added. And then, and all of these weren't releases. These were just in the development process. So I not only did I steal design elements, as encouraged by Salesforce, they really want you to build your app to fit into their design look. So not only did I steal design looks from from Salesforce, but I stole all kinds of design decisions from Apple, from their messaging app, and from Android. At the time, I was using an Android phone, and my wife had an iPhone, so I would just go back and forth and look at the two messaging apps. And there are some things that the temptation is, let me innovate. How can I make this better than anybody has done before? And that's a dangerous ambition, right? Instead, if you're building an app, why not make it as intuitive as you possibly can? And the way to make it intuitive is don't reinvent the wheel, right? So, for example, when you click on a conversation and you see all of the messages in that conversation appear in little talk bubbles, okay? The ones on the right, are those from the other person, or are those from you? Those are from you. You know yours are on the right and the person you're talking with is on the left. Well, why do you know that? I don't know. That's because iPhone does it that way. Android does it that way. Every chatbot does it that way. That's just how it works. And so that's what I did. Are the newest messages at the top or at the bottom of that scrolling window? They're at the bottom, of course. And where do you enter your next message? At the bottom. So these are design decisions that if you're building from scratch, you have to make. But you might as well steal them in order to make it intuitive. If I'd done it the other way, I would have customers complaining to me all the time. So again, you kind of have to fight that design innovation instinct and instead say, what is the UI that will make this the most intuitive? I don't want to have to explain things.
I prefer using the word, instead of using the word stolen or steal, creative plagiarism.
There you go.
But you're totally onto something in the sense of the whole principle of user experience, of UX, is not to build something that's original. It's to build something that people are already familiar with. To your point, there's already best practices, or at least familiarity with how to use messaging apps. You might as well follow the industry standard, so to speak, instead of reinventing something that's completely original that you have to now teach your users how to use. Because people have normally used text apps and various chatbots, they're expecting a certain kind of behavior, a certain kind of principle. When they click the send button, there are certain things that they're expecting to happen. You just need to copy them. It's nothing. It's a simple, and yet, unfortunately, not enough organizations follow this principle of just keeping it simple, following suit. You might add a little flair here and there just to make things interesting for yours to stand out a little bit, but not core functionality like this.
Yeah, exactly. When I started building the Proton Blaster, in the very earliest stages, I was thinking, I get to build a Proton Blaster. This is going to be the coolest looking UI you've ever seen. And then I started thinking about, all right, how do people want to use it? What does it need to do? And ultimately, what it needs to be able to do is let you schedule out in advance bulk text blasts to a big group of people. And it would probably be integrated in with campaigns. So where you've got campaign members. So I was going to use the existing schema to define the group of people. No reason for me to have to create that. So then I thought, well, what is the UI for the blaster? And ultimately, the most functional UI is a calendar. That's how people want to think about scheduling out blasts. And so I built from scratch in Lightning Web Components a calendar interface, and everybody knows how to use a calendar. If I want to send out a blast on the 15th, I'm going to look at that calendar and I'm going to double click on the 15th, and it's going to open up a little modal, and I'm going to put in my information there, just like you would. I tell people scheduling a blast is easier than scheduling a Zoom meeting. It's right there. It's all on your calendar. And then you can look and see your whole schedule of blasts to this campaign. And you just click the little right arrow button and it goes to the next month. So there, I just wanted to steal an interface, plagiarize a UI that everybody knows how to use already, a calendar.
When building the app, I've noticed myself, there's always a difference between building it and testing it within a dev environment, and then packaging it up and then deploying it in another dev environment or even in a production organization, because things can work in a dev environment but then break in that QA environment. Do you find the same kind of frustration, and how do you deal with that? Because it's usually around permissions or all those constraints that managed packages have.
Yeah, the only place that I've really seen it is sometimes where I've applied some CSS styling and it looks funny on a customer's computer, and I think, what's going on in there? Why isn't that centered up the way it should be? And then I'll check their settings, and they're looking at it in compact versus comfy or whatever. So just some little things like that, and it's always been that way for them, so they don't feel like it looks wrong. It just looks different than I'm used to seeing. So it's little things like that. When Salesforce changed their font, maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I lose track of this, but they changed their actual default font, and that introduced some funny behaviors that I just had to go in and fix. That wasn't too big a deal. But org to org, it doesn't really seem to. My app doesn't really seem to have that much difference. I will say that adapting my app to mobile has been particularly challenging because the UI that you're used to seeing on mobile for your messaging app, that sets a very high standard of how you interact with an app. And so that took a lot of effort. And I basically rewrote my entire one-to-one messenger about a year ago, or starting about a year ago, converting it from Aura components to Lightning Web components. I needed to add new features to it. The Aura component was working fine, but I needed to add new features and wanted to take the opportunity to update that code base to Lightning Web components. And in doing so, I spent a lot of time making that mobile version of the app really performant. So I found that was the more challenging than the sort of org-to-org deviation that you're talking about.
One of the most critical elements of building an app is trying to figure out how to price it. I mean, obviously it can be free, but for the most part, a lot of apps are paid. And there's I don't know how many different versions or different flavors of ways of pricing, but you chose one that I found to be quite interesting. Can you share that with the audience?
Yeah, I've got a pricing strategy that I don't necessarily recommend to anybody that wants to make a lot of money. Again, I'm a company of one person. I don't have a staff. I wrote the code. I do the support. I do the sales, all of that. I don't have any investors or staff to keep employed. And therefore, I've got some flexibility that most businesses don't. I also have consulting income that really sustains me. So this is kind of a secondary revenue stream for me that allows me to use it how I want to do it. Therefore, my pricing, I started, when you try to figure out your pricing, first thing you do is you look at your competitors. How are they doing it? My competitors have a complicated pricing model where you pay a license fee for each user. That part's simple. People are used to that. The complicated part is that in addition to that, $15 a month per user or whatever they're charging, then you also pay for a bundle of text segments to cover your usage each month. And that might be 10,000 text segments a month or 100,000, depends on the size of your company. And the problem is you have to decide first, who gets a license, which users of mine get to text. And then, and there's pressure to, keep that number minimal. And also, how many texts are we going to send and receive? And that's kind of hard to know, particularly if you've got some busy times of the year, like when you're doing your annual fundraising, or you've got, a big event in the summertime or whatever. It's a little bit hard to kind of judge how many texts you're going to need in a given month. And there's some overreach charges if you go over those. So I really wanted to simplify that. And my belief is that the real value of a text app is its accessibility. It really should be on every page and available to every user. So you shouldn't have to choose which users get to text. So for my app, there's no per user charge. Instead, I went with a flat monthly fee that is licensing just for the app. Okay. Now for businesses, that's $249 a month. And for my business customers, that's very affordable and a lot less than they used to pay. Most of my customers, or many of my customers, have come from another provider. I bailed on them. And then, so it's $249 for businesses, but it's sliding scale for nonprofits. My nonprofit customers pay between $49 and $149 a month. And that's based on their decision on what they can afford. I figure you don't work in nonprofits if you don't have a conscience. So I just trust my customers to pay me what they can so that I can continue to offer it to smaller nonprofits that might not be able to pay as much. And I mentioned that my competitors sell you these bundles of text segments to cover your actual usage. That's to cover the fee that they incur, and I'm sure they mark it up too. That's the fee of the cost of a telecom provider. I use Twilio, and most of them use Twilio. That's the sort of API connection to all of the carriers. All right, so that backend is going to exist for everybody, whether they tell you about it or not, and whether it's Twilio or one of their competitors. So there's that actual outbound cost that they have to cover, and so they buy their texts in bundles and repackage them and mark them up for their customers. Well, rather than rebundling and marking them up, my customers establish their own account directly with Twilio. So there's no markup at all. You have complete control over your usage and the usage costs. And then by having your own account, nonprofits can take advantage of Twilio's impact program. Twilio, by the way, was one of the co-founding organizations behind the Pledge One organization, which encourages corporate philanthropy. Their impact program for nonprofits gives a startup, gives a new customer a $500 startup credit, which goes a long way in paying for texts, which are less than a penny a piece. And in addition to that $500 startup credit, they discount your billing by 25% forever. Now, you couldn't get that if you were going through a for-profit provider like me. So I don't want to be, stepping in the middle of that relationship and preventing you from getting those kind of benefits.
You talked earlier about your go-to-market strategy. That is, Salesforce was recommending you pick a niche when it was launched on the App Exchange. Aside from picking that niche, was there any other things you had to keep in mind or decisions you had to make in order to be able to market this app?
Yeah, so I'm a small company, and when you're marketing an app, Salesforce App Exchange provides lots of opportunities for you to be supported by their marketing, to be featured in their blogs, to be, to get sessions places, to be featured here or there, or whatever. And it's all very expensive. Sponsoring a Salesforce event, sponsoring, at Trailhead DX or Trailblazer DX is now called, or at Dreamforce is prohibitively expensive for a small partner like myself. I just don't have the revenues to support it. It doesn't make sense for me to do. So I knew early on that my marketing needed to be something that I could accomplish myself in the time that I have, while also building the code base and marketing and supporting this app. And so my business marketing is very much aligned with my personal brand management. And by that, I mean, I am heavily involved in the Ohana. I speak at probably 12 to 15 user groups a year. I've spoken at Dreamforce 3 times. I've spoken at TDX twice. So I speak a lot. And by the way, when I'm speaking, I'm generally not speaking about Proton Text. I'm generally speaking about development or about soft skills, like how to age-proof your LinkedIn profile, or I'm speaking about technical things, sometimes invocable Apex, or other things that I've gained some expertise during the process of building this app. So, I introduced myself. I'm Pat McClellan. I'm an App Exchange partner. I'm marketing. I created Proton Text on the App Exchange. So there's that association with me. But then I go on and give them something that's valuable to them that is not selling to them. And I find that if you can make people feel better about themselves by learning something, or be inspired that I can do this, even though I'm a 50-something career transition person, I can find a place in this Ohana, in this ecosystem. If you can inspire them to think better about themselves, you get that halo effect. They think, oh, that Pat McClellan, he made me feel good about myself. He taught me something new. I'm going to look at his app. They will recommend my app even without ever seeing a demo of my app. So I see product marketing, and again, you can't do this if you're a big company and you've got a big sales team out there selling your app for you. It's something that for many small developers that are trying to personally market their own app, this is how you do it. You get involved and you don't make it all about sell, sell, sell. Instead, you make it about help, 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 and inspire and teach, and you'll get the halo effect from that.
So as of this recording today, Salesforce has just announced that the Salesforce Nonprofit Cloud, the NPSP package, that's a managed package on top of the Salesforce core, is going to be integrated into the core, that it's going to be part of the core package, and that eventually, I imagine at some point, NPSP will disappear. It might be many, many years from now. They claim that they will support it for many years to come, but for sure there's going to be some kind of end of life to that. That's a pretty big news for us in the nonprofit world, my app, your app, and everybody, and even new customers moving to Salesforce. So I'm not quite sure when this recording will be published, but the idea is, so it might be a bit more of an older news by the time it gets public, but I'm curious to know in terms of, what impact do you think it's going to have to you in the short term and the long term in terms of your app?
Sure. Well, as you say, they just announced it today, and as a partner and an MVP, I had a preview of it. I looked at a dev org with it installed and started looking at it. But what they've announced today is sort of a first offering with some announcements about what's coming. And I think it's safe to say that nobody is going out and doing an install of this today. Not that I'm not being derogatory here. I'm just saying this is a first draft, right? They're putting it out there. They're putting it out there for feedback, I'm sure, because like I do, they get their best ideas from their customers. It's going to be a while before this really displaces any significant portion of MPSP or any other org setup, schema and org setup that customers are doing, that nonprofits are using, I think. Now, I can't sit on my hands, but I don't have to worry about getting something out by the end of this week. As I mentioned, my app really seeks to integrate as tightly with the schema and the org as possible so that it is intuitive, it is everywhere you want it to be. And what we're seeing are the first of new standard objects that are going to be available in Nonprofit Cloud. I need to make some updates to my app to make it more flexible to meet the needs of these. And as I look at this, I could initially go in and sort of hard code it to the objects that are there today, but then I know that I'm going to have to make that update every time they do a new release and add some new objects to that. So instead, I'm thinking about, in an environment where the schema is going to be changing, how can I re-engineer the connectivity of my app to make it flexible, to adapt to those changes automatically. So that's how I'm thinking, and I'm kind of excited about the engineering challenge behind this. I'm looking forward to that part of it. But there will be some work involved, and a new release coming up probably in the next few months.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where things go too, and I totally understand why Salesforce is making this choice of integrating it into the core platform, because there was a lot of overlap between all the various other industries, not just nonprofit, but health and finance and stuff like that. So it's really a synchronization and an aggregation of these objects and a bit of the functionality too. And I agree that it's going to be a few years from now where we really need to worry about these kinds of things, that no one's going to be jumping ship today to say, okay, we want the shiny new toy. It has to be proven. Feature parity for sure is going to take a while to get there. So it will be a consideration at some point in the future, maybe a couple of years from now, but not today.
Yeah, I think the real challenge for us over the next year or so is going to be that you've got some very deserving and worthy nonprofits out there that want to get started in Salesforce and take advantage of the 10 free licenses and get going with Salesforce. They're eager to do so. And they go to consultants and say, tell me what I should do. And right now, consultants are kind of scratching their head because the new nonprofit cloud is not quite complete yet, but you don't necessarily want to get somebody up and running on the old way of doing it and then have to convert them later. So it's there's a lot of uncertainty over the next 6 to 12 months, I think.
So aside from that kind of uncertainty, I'm curious to know if you have any any details you can share about the next version of Proton Text? Any new features we can look forward to seeing?
I've touched on I made the big new feature set over the last year with the out of office and the scheduled one-to-one texts and the real-time error reporting and that sort of thing, group text. So that I feel like in terms of sort of UI things, we're pretty complete. The next focus for me will be the next big release will really be focused on nonprofit cloud and making it more, making the underlying infrastructure more flexible, more schema flexible to accommodate these new changes in nonprofit cloud.
Awesome. So this has been really informative, Pat. Can you share your socials so that people can get in touch with you if they have more questions or want to learn more about the app?
Sure. Well, for starters, I'll point you to protontext.com. Go to protontext.com. It's not a gorgeous site. It's a site that I built on Experience Cloud. And again, I've already admitted I'm not a great designer, but it's informative. It gives my customers all the instructions that they need. But there, in particular, there's a tab there for features. And you can see images of a lot of the features that we've talked about here, the scheduled texts and out of office, et cetera. So take a look at Proton Text there and feel free to contact me. You can reach me at pat@proton7group.com. Feel free to drop me a note and I'll be more than happy to do a live demo for you and your team. You can find me on Twitter, though I have to say over the last 3 to 6 months, I've been a lot less active on Twitter. But you can find me at Pat McClellan __C, like the custom field or whatever. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Pat McClellan. I'm happy to connect and network.
We'll include all those links in the show notes below. Pat, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.